Welcome to the Deep Dive. You know, where we help you make sense of way too much information. Today, we're diving into the SAP Business Technology Platform.
BTP for short.
BTP it is. We're focusing on what admins need to know, all taken from SAP's own administrator's guide.
It's kind of like your roadmap to planning, setting up, and actually running your whole BTP landscape.
So, BTP, what's the big picture? Before we get into the weeds, I need that high-level view.
Okay, so BTP, IIS a cloud platform, but it's more like a multi-tool for business. Brings together app development, automation, data analysis, AI, all that. Oh, and it's really made for SAP applications.
Yeah.
So if you're already using SAP, this is kind of the next step.
Gotcha. Sounds pretty complete. But the cloud can be a jungle. How does BTP handle all the different choices out there?
That's where the whole multi-cloud thing comes in. You're not stuck with one provider. You've got BTP working across different clouds, different runtimes.
Like what?
You've got Cloud Foundry,
Okay.
ADAP, even Kaima.
Wow.
And it works across different regions and programming languages.
Flexibility is key.
Exactly.
Okay, tons of choices. But with all that flexibility, how do you manage everything without getting lost? I'm going to need a map and a compass.
Well, that's where the BTP cockpit comes in. Think of it as your command center.
Okay.
Managing accounts, applications. It's like mission control for your BTP.
Mission control, I like it. It makes me feel like we're about to launch a rocket. Speaking of launching things, how is BTP structured?
It all starts with the global account. That's at the top. It manages everything. Sub-accounts, members, entitlements, quotas, and your commercial model.
Global account. Top dog, got it. But where do you actually run applications? Where do those live?
Sub-accounts. Think of them as the workhorses of BTP. Each sub-account is tied to a region, and it handles the actual deployment of your apps, consuming services, subscriptions, all that.
So global account is overseeing everything, then sub-accounts for each specific region.
Okay.
But what are these directories I keep seeing? Are they some kind of filing system?
Directories are kind of like labeled folders for your sub-accounts.
Yeah.
And here's the interesting part. They're optional. You add them when you need that extra organization.
Hold on. So if I have like teams in Europe and Asia, I could use directories to organize BTP by region.
Yeah. Makes managing multiple teams or projects way easier.
Okay.
It could even help performance by keeping resources closer to users.
Directories sound like they could prevent headaches down the line, especially as things get bigger. But let's talk about what BTP can do. What are its superpowers?
Do you remember that multi-tool idea?
Yeah.
Well, BTP uses fast in-memory processing. It delivers those agile solutions. It's got powerful integration capabilities, embedded analytics, and AI.
Sounds impressive. But how does it deliver all that? What's the magic behind the curtain?
Services. Think of them as specialized tools
Okay.
within BTP. They're designed for specific things. They enable, facilitate, and accelerate everything from development to other platform services.
So if I need to like manage data, analyze it, connect systems, or build something with AI, there's a service for that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a ton of them.
Yeah.
You can check out the services section in the documentation,
Mm-hmm.
but there are services for data management, analytics, integration, you name it.
Okay, now I'm a little worried. All these services, with great power comes great potential cost, right?
Yeah.
How does BTP handle that?
Entitlements and quotas. Entitlements are like tickets. They let you use specific resources based on your plan. They're tied to service plans.
Okay.
So think of it like choosing a t-shirt size
Okay.
for databases.
Gotcha.
You've got small, medium, large. Each one comes with a different service plan and thus different entitlements.
It makes sense.
And quotas. Those define the max resources you can use. For each service, it's all about controlling cost and making sure everything's fair across your sub-accounts.
So quotas are like the bouncer at the BTP club, making sure we don't get out of hand.
You got it. And here's a practical tip. The documentation really emphasizes appointing substitute administrators,
Okay.
just in case, someone needs to step in if the primary admin's unavailable. Always good to have a backup.
Absolutely. Speaking of users, how does BTP handle all the different people involved? There's got to be different levels of access, right?
Yeah, BTP separates platform users and business users.
Okay.
So platform users are the people building, managing, troubleshooting the platform itself, your developers, admins, operators.
Okay.
Business users, those are the ones using the applications,
Makes sense.
like your typical SaaS user or someone using a custom tool built on BTP.
So platform users are behind the scenes keeping the BTP engine running, and business users are enjoying the ride.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make sure everyone has the right keys to the car?
Member management. That's about controlling access for platform users. defining their roles and responsibilities. And you can do that at different levels: global account, directory, sub-account, even the environment level.
So if I want to make sure only certain people can deploy applications, I can control that through member management.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there's user management. That focuses on the business users, handles their authentication and authorization within the apps themselves. Two sides of the same coin. Member management for the PTT crew and user management for the folks using the apps. Now, this structure, global account, sub-account, directory, it sounds pretty separate from individual user accounts. Does that mean security is even more complex than I thought?
You're picking up on something important. The documentation kind of hints at a more complex security model where these structures are independent of user accounts. It allows for a more granular approach to permissions and access.
Ooh, okay. Good to know. But we can dive into that security rabbit hole later.
Definitely.
Before we move on, let's talk about the business side. How does BTP handle things like contracts and costs?
BTP has two main commercial models, consumption-based and subscription-based.
Kind of like choosing between a buffet and a set menu, right? Break it down for me.
Consumption-based is like pay as you go. You get access to the eligible services, but you only pay for what you use.
Okay, so if I'm a startup and my needs are constantly changing, that consumption-based model could be a good option.
It could be. And there are different flavors within consumption-based.
Like what?
BTP Enterprise Agreement, pay as you go.
Yeah.
You can check out the SAP BTP pricing and SAP Integration Suite pricing sections for all the details.
Got it. So lots of options there. Now, we talked about regions, but what about environments? Are those like different planets in the BTP universe?
Environments are more like labs
Okay.
within your BTP sub-account.
Yeah.
It's where you develop and manage your applications.
So if I need different spaces for development, testing, production, environments are the answer.
Yep. You can have multiple environments in one sub-account.
Yeah.
Gives you that flexibility to, experiment without affecting your live applications.
So I could have like a playground environment to test things out.
Exactly.
Okay, that's smart. And the best part is user management, authorization, entitlements, that's all streamlined at the sub-account level.
Yeah, so you only manage those things once, even if you have multiple environments running.
Super efficient. But how do regions fit into this? We know they're geographical locations, but do we need to choose them strategically?
Regions are definitely important. They determine where your applications, data, and services are actually hosted.
Physically, you mean?
Yeah. So when you're choosing, you want to consider things like service availability, security requirements, data privacy regulations, and even where your other cloud services are located.
Okay, so if I'm dealing with sensitive data in Europe, I should probably stick with a European region. Makes sense.
Now, before we wrap this up, who's responsible for what when it comes to managing BTP? It's not all on me, right?
No, definitely not. There's a shared responsibility model.
Okay.
SAP handles the platform infrastructure, updates, patching, monitoring, capacity management, that kind of stuff.
So they make sure the BTP engine is running smoothly.
Exactly. Your focus is on managing your accounts, your applications, security, integrations, application-specific health checks, and updates. So SAP provides the foundation. I build the house on top. But I'm still in charge of keeping my house secure, updated, and integrated with the rest of the neighborhood.
That's it.
Okay.
And the documentation emphasizes following security recommendations, especially if you're using open source software. They even have a specific section about it.
Duly noted. I don't want to be the one with the leaky roof in the BTP neighborhood. So, the recap. We've covered the basics of BTP. It's a flexible platform, multi-cloud, with a bunch of powerful services, and you manage it through the BTP cockpit.
Right.
We explore the whole account model from the global account down to the sub-account and those directories for organization. We even touched on entitlements, quotas, and the shared responsibility model.
You got the basics down. In the next part, we're going to dive into that getting started checklist and some key setup considerations, just to make sure your BTP journey is successful.
Okay, sounds good. And remember, this is all about becoming a BTP master. As we go forward, think about how you can apply this knowledge to your specific needs and what questions you still have. We'll be back with more, so stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've explored the landscape, so now let's figure out how to be successful with BTP. Starting with that getting started checklist the documentation mentions. Where do we even begin if we're totally new to BTP?
The checklist really pushes familiarizing yourself with the basics. Like reading the map before a trick. Got to grasp those key concepts.
Okay.
Understand those responsibilities. You've got to remember that shared responsibility model.
Right. We know who's holding the compass and who brought snacks. But the BTP world seems huge. What's next on the checklist?
They recommend the SAP Discovery Center. It's like a BTP playground with all kinds of resources to get you started.
Ooh, I love a good playground.
It gives you a nice overview of the BTP services,
Hmm.
has these guided missions to walk you through different scenarios, and even offers reference architectures to, inspire your own projects.
Sounds fun. A way to get our hands dirty without any real consequences. But eventually we got to leave the sandbox, right? How do we make sure we're successful in the long run?
That's where choosing the right commercial model comes in. Remember that buffet versus set menu analogy?
Yeah.
The checklist wants you to really think about your needs. Do you need that flexibility or a fixed cost?
Okay.
And then once you figure that out, they direct you to the pricing sections for the details.
Gotcha. Got to make sure we're picking the right meal plan for our BTP needs. What happens once we've sorted out the finances?
Next is onboarding to SAP Cloud Identity Services. This is where we set up that account model, defining global account, sub-accounts, and whether we need those directories.
So we're building the foundation of our BTP house, making sure everything's organized. What else is key to success here?
The documentation has several key setup considerations. First, creating a governance model. This is about setting the rules,
Okay.
establishing clear processes, roles, responsibilities, basically how we're going to manage our BTP landscape.
Got it. Making sure everyone knows who takes out the trash in our BTP house. What else do they recommend?
It suggests setting up a staged development environment. Like, imagine separate labs for development, testing, and production.
Keeps things organized.
Yeah, and it minimizes risks. Experiments shouldn't blow up the live apps.
Separate spaces for separate purposes. Smart. Anything else?
Security. Got to implement strong security measures from the get-go.
Yeah.
Protect that data and those apps from intruders.
Right. Security is critical. And finally, what about failover? Yeah, in case something unexpected happens.
Excellent point. Planning for failover ensures those mission-critical apps stay up and running, even when things go wrong.
Okay.
It's like having a backup generator for our BTP house.
Right. Got to be prepared. Now, this platform engineering team they mention, operating as a center of excellence, what's their role in all of this?
Think of them as the BTP experts.
Okay.
Your central hub for everything BTP. They drive cloud adoption, provide guidance, troubleshoot issues, and champion new ways to use the platform.
So they're managing the platform and also spreading the BTP gospel, helping everyone get the most out of it.
Exactly. They're key to successfully implementing and adopting BTP throughout an organization. They're like the friendly neighborhood BTP experts, always ready to help.
I like it. So we've laid the groundwork and built that solid foundation for our BTP world. But now we're ready to welcome some new development projects into our BTP neighborhood. How do we make sure they integrate well?
The documentation really stresses a clear onboarding process for new development projects.
Okay.
Just to ensure that those projects are documented, tracked, and aligned with your security and your overall BTP strategy.
It's like having a welcome wagon for new projects, making sure they know the rules and have everything they need to succeed.
Yeah, exactly. They even recommend this onboarding document. It captures all those essential details about the project.
What kind of details?
Think of it like a passport.
Okay.
It outlines which organization or department's involved, the app name, the business case, the planned go-live date, the owners, data flow, technologies used.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty detailed. It sounds like it could prevent some headaches down the road. What about the security side of things? How do we ensure new projects are following our strict security protocols?
There's a security document, too,
Okay.
outlining those user groups, data classifications, compliance requirements, data flow, and authentication protocols.
Okay.
And they even suggest a template for this, something that's reviewed and approved by the security experts before any development work begins.
Sounds thorough.
Yeah.
What is this services catalog they keep mentioning? Is that like a menu of BTP services?
It's like a comprehensive menu of everything offered by your platform engineering team. So, it provides a clear overview of what's available and how to get it. Really valuable when you've got multiple development teams working on different things.
Prevents those, what do we have again? Conversations.
Yeah, exactly. Empowers everyone to find what they need without having to ask for directions all the time.
Now back to the account model. We know the global account is at the top. Sub-accounts are where things happen, but how do we actually set them up?
Once you've got your commercial contract with SAP, you get the access information and credentials for your global account.
Okay.
That's your key to the kingdom.
Okay.
From there, you create sub-accounts
Mm-hmm.
based on your needs, regions, projects, whatever works for your organization.
Global account is the master key, and we make separate keys for each room in the house.
Got it.
Yeah.
I'm still not entirely clear on directories, though. When do they become absolutely necessary?
So directories, remember, those are those optional folders.
Right. Yeah.
The documentation has a few scenarios where they become essential.
Like, when would I definitely need to use a directory? Well, you might use directories to mirror your company's structure. So each department or subsidiary has its own directory
Okay.
to manage its own BTP resources.
Keeps things tidy, aligns with how we already work. What else?
Billing,
Oh, okay.
if you need to track costs by department or by project,
Right.
directories can help separate those expenses.
Makes sense. So it's for organization, A&D, financial tracking. Any other examples?
Geographical separation. Say you've got operations in Europe and Asia.
Okay.
You might create separate directories for each region
Okay.
to comply with local rules or maybe to optimize performance in those areas.
Right. So if I've got applications running in different parts of the world, I can use directories to group them logically and make sure they're following the rules. Anything else?
Sometimes it's about those specific business needs. Imagine you have projects that need a ton of resources.
Okay.
Directories let you manage those resources for each project, making sure one project doesn't hog everything.
Okay. Anything else?
Sometimes there are technical reasons for using directories. If you have certain technical limitations,
Got it.
you might need directories to group those sub-accounts in a way that meets those constraints.
Okay. Directories sound like a powerful organizational tool. What about labels? How do they differ from directories?
Think of labels as tags
Okay.
for your sub-accounts and directories. They let you create virtual groupings
Okay.
for reporting and analysis without changing the structure.
So I could use labels to track costs across different sub-accounts that are part of the same project, even if they're in different directories.
Exactly. They're super flexible.
Got it. They're like adding notes to our BTP blueprints, making things easier to find. Before we jump into security, any best practices for setting up our account model? It's a lot to take in.
Don't worry, there's a checklist for that too. They say to think about the big picture before creating accounts.
Okay.
Align it with your company goals and make sure it supports your overall BTP strategy.
So plan the layout before you start building the house.
Exactly. And you got to define those standards and rules for your account model, like naming conventions for the accounts, using labels consistently, setting those quota limits,
Okay.
and even setting up an enrollment process for new projects just to make sure everything's done right.
Keep things consistent.
Yeah. It just prevents confusion and simplifies management.
Makes sense. Any real-world examples of how companies structure their account models?
The documentation has a few common approaches.
Yeah.
One is structuring by functional area.
Okay.
So you create separate directories for different departments, HR, finance, sales, that kind of thing.
Each department gets its own BTP space to manage.
Yeah, gives them autonomy while maintaining that structure and control.
Another approach is organizing by location.
Okay.
If you're global, you might have directories for different regions or countries, mirroring your physical locations.
Makes sense, especially with those data residency rules. Any other common patterns?
Some organize by subsidiary.
Okay.
If you have multiple subsidiaries, they each get their own directory. So each subsidiary gets its own sandbox. Keeps things separated. Okay, great. Now, before we dive into security, I got to ask about naming conventions. It seems like a small thing, but I have a feeling it matters.
It definitely does. You've got to have clear and consistent naming conventions. The documentation gives some good guidelines.
What should we consider when naming global accounts, directories, sub-accounts, all that?
Keep it short, descriptive, and easy to understand. No cryptic abbreviations or super long names.
Oh, right. We want informative names that aren't a mouthful.
And try to use a consistent structure for everything. So include the company name in your subdomains and Cloud Foundry organization names.
Just ownership.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For subaccounts, subdomains, and Cloud Foundry spaces, use lowercase letters and hyphens.
Okay.
That's for compatibility with URL requirements. And for directories, choose names that reflect what they're for, whether it's by function, location, or subsidiary.
So short, descriptive, and consistent. Easy enough. Any naming tips for those labels we talked about?
Same thing for labels. Short, descriptive, make it easy to categorize and analyze. Like labeling a spice rack. You want to know what's what.
Okay, got it. Consistent and clear naming check. I think it's time to tackle BTP security. It's a big and sometimes scary topic, so let's break it down. Where do we start?
The documentation highlights some key principles. Think of them as our guiding stars for navigating security.
Okay, I'm ready to chart a course. What are those core principles?
One is defense in depth.
Okay.
So you implement multiple layers of security, If one fails, the others are there.
Like having multiple locks in your door.
Yeah. It makes it harder for intruders to get in. What other security principles are emphasized? Least privilege. That means you only give users the access they need to do their job.
Okay.
Limits damage if something goes wrong, like having keys to only certain rooms in a house.
Smart move. What else?
Secure defaults. BTP is designed with security baked in. Secure configurations right from the start.
Like having a security system pre-installed.
Exactly. You don't have to start from scratch.
Reassuring. Okay, let's talk about network security. How does BTP protect itself from all those threats out there?
It's got a multi-layered approach, starting with firewalls,
Okay.
controlling traffic, blocking unauthorized access. They're the gatekeepers.
Firewalls are the first line of defense. What else?
A DMZ, or the demilitarized zone, isolates BTP from the public internet,
Okay.
like a buffer zone, protecting your data from the Wild West out there.
Got it. Like a security checkpoint. What else?
ETP also uses communication proxies for all traffic.
Oh,
They inspect the data, preventing malicious code or access, like security guards inspecting every package going in and out.
no contraband allowed?
Exactly. And on top of that, all user access is secured with TLS, transport layer security. Encrypts everything, so no one can eavesdrop.
Like a secret code.
Exactly.
Okay, so BTP is like Fort Knox for our data. But what about internal threats? How do we manage users and make sure everyone has the right access without making things too complicated?
It comes down to how you want to handle things. There are different ways to manage failback. One is to trigger it manually.
Okay.
So an admin has to start the process. Once they've checked that the primary data center is back online and everything's working.
So it's like flipping a switch to turn things back on. But are there any automatic options so we don't have to babysit the system?
Yeah, some systems have automatic failback.
Okay.
The system checks the health of the primary data center and automatically switches back once it's all good.
That's convenient, but are there any downsides to automatic failback? I wouldn't want the system to flip-flop between data centers if there are, like, intermittent issues.
Good point. Automatic failback needs to be configured carefully. You don't want the system switching back and forth, causing more problems.
Right, we don't want things to get too chaotic. No, the documentation mentions some interesting use cases for these multi-region setups, beyond just failover. What else can we do with them?
One use case is making SAP BTP applications even more resilient. You deploy your KCAPI application across multiple regions, use techniques like multi-zone replication or read replicas. You create a system that's incredibly fault-tolerant.
So even if an entire region goes down, our application can still run in another region. That's pretty cool. Any other examples?
They also mention benefits for some SAP SaaS applications like SAP Build Work Zone and SAP Cloud Integration.
Okay.
Deploying these across multiple regions and using intelligent routing can really boost performance for users all over the world, reduce that latency, and ensure high availability, even if one region has problems.
So multi-region architectures can create a truly global BTP experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds like it. Okay, let's talk development. We've got the groundwork done, security set up, failover planned. Now it's time to actually build those BTP apps. Where do we start?
For the details of the development process, check out the SAP BTP Developer's Guide.
Okay.
That's your go-to for building applications on BTP, choosing the right programming model, different languages, tools, best practices, all of that.
So the developer's guide is our construction manual for BTP. But how do we choose the right approach? There are so many options.
The developer's guide really pushes this design-led development process.
Okay.
You start with a clear understanding of the business opportunity.
Okay.
What are you trying to solve? Who are your users? What value are you delivering? You figure all that out before writing any code.
So it's like talking to the architect before you start building the house.
Exactly.
Once we have the plan, how do we choose the right programming models and technologies?
BTP has lots of options. One popular choice is the ABB RESTful Application Programming Model.
RP.
Yeah, RP. It's a modern framework for building those SAP Fiori apps and OData services.
I've heard good things about Auric.
It's all about making development faster and easier,
Okay.
using ABP, but with modern web technologies that people like to use.
Makes sense. Are there other programming models we should know about?
Another popular choice is the SAP Cloud Application Programming Model, CAP. That one's for building cloud-native apps using Java or Node.js. It's got a comprehensive set of tools and best practices for building enterprise-grade applications.
So if we're familiar with Java or Node.js, CAP can help us build those modern cloud-native apps that work well with the rest of the SAP world.
Right.
Okay, once we've built our amazing app, we need to deploy it. Let users start using it. What are our options for this?
There's manual deployment and automated delivery.
Okay.
Manual deployment works for simpler apps, smaller projects.
Okay.
You can use the BTP cockpit or the Cloud Foundry command line to move the app to the target environment.
But for bigger, more complex applications, we'd want something more automated, right?
Yeah, exactly. For those big projects, you need automated delivery.
Okay.
It's a consistent, repeatable, and controlled process. Helps you move those app changes through your development pipeline, minimizes errors, and keeps things running smoothly.
We've heard about those tools. CI/CD for automating the build and deployment,
Right.
and cloud transport management for moving apps between environments. But how do we choose which approach to use?
Think about how complex your app is, the size of your team, your governance requirements, and whether you need to work with existing change management processes.
Okay, so there's no one right answer. We have to choose what fits our project. And what about failover? How do we make sure our deployment process is resilient, if something goes wrong?
Great question. The documentation says to include failover in your deployment strategy.
Okay,
So, for example, if you're using a CI/CD pipeline, set it up to deploy to both your primary and your backup data centers.
gotcha. So even if one data center goes down, the pipeline keeps working. Smart. We've deployed to our test environment. Now it's time to make sure it works well with everything else. What about integration testing on BTP?
They really emphasize treating those integration tests just as carefully as you would your unit tests.
Okay.
You got to cover all those interactions with external systems, make sure the data is flowing right, APIs are working, the whole system is playing nicely together.
Like a dress rehearsal before the big show. Everything has to work together perfectly.
Exactly.
What tools can we use for this?
BTP has lots of testing tools to make sure everything works as it should. If you're building SAP Y5 apps, there's OPA5,
Okay.
one-page acceptance tests. It's a great framework for testing user interactions, navigation, and data binding, making sure the user experience is seamless.
So OPA5 is our quality control for SAP UI5 applications. What if we're using a different programming model?
For the Cloud Application Programming Model, CAP, there's a specific testing framework. You can write unit tests, integration tests, even end-to-end tests.
So BTP has everything we need to make sure our apps are working well with the other systems we use. Now, speaking of integration, BTP offers a lot of ways to connect to other systems. What are the main approaches we should know about?
One of those powerful tools is SAP Cloud Integration, CPI.
Okay.
It's a cloud-based integration platform. It connects a huge range of systems, apps, and data sources. Doesn't matter if they're in your data center or someone else's cloud.
So CPI can connect to anything, anywhere.
Pretty much. It's got a visual designer for those data flows, pre-built connectors for common systems, supports different data formats and protocols. Plus, it has strong security and monitoring.
Wow, it's like the ultimate integration tool.
Yeah.
But is it the right tool for every situation?
CPI is best for those complex integrations. When you need to manage lots of data flows, transform data, implement logic, ensure reliable messaging.
Got it. So for simpler connections, are there easier options?
For simple point-to-point connections, especially with on-premise systems, the cloud connector is a good choice.
Right. That secure tunnel we talked about earlier. No need for a complex integration platform for those simpler connections.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, before we move on to going live, there's a service called Cloud Integration Automation Service, CIS.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
CIS is designed to make certain integrations even easier. Provides pre-built flows, templates, and guided workflows.
Okay.
Basically, it streamlines common integration tasks, saves you time and effort.
Like a shortcut for common integrations?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's especially useful for things like connecting to SAP SuccessFactors,
Okay.
integrating with e-commerce platforms, or setting up data replication.
Sounds efficient. Okay, let's talk go live. We've built our app, tested it, integrated it. Now it's time to let users actually use it. What do we need to keep in mind as we go live?
You got to ensure a smooth transition
Okay.
from test to production.
Okay.
Careful planning, coordination, and you need solid monitoring and rollback options in case anything goes wrong.
Makes sense. It's like opening night. We want everything to go perfectly. What else is important?
Communicate.
Okay.
Keep everyone informed. Timelines, potential impacts, any actions they need to take.
Yeah.
Transparency builds trust.
Right. Got to make sure everyone's on the same page. Now our app is live. Users are happy. We're in the operate phase. How do we make sure things keep running smoothly?
Set up a strong monitoring strategy.
Okay.
Gather data on performance, resource use, errors, anything that might pop up. Then you analyze that data to find areas for improvement. It's like having a stage crew making sure everything's working during a show.
We need those behind-the-scenes folks to keep things running.
Uh,
What tools can we use to monitor BTP applications?
BTP has a bunch of monitoring tools. One is SAP Cloud ALM for operations.
Okay.
It's a central dashboard, lets you track everything, get alerts, analyze performance trends. You can even connect it with other monitoring tools if you need to.
So Cloud ALM gives us a complete view of what's happening with our apps. What about specific tools for different environments?
For Cloud Foundry, there's SAP Application Logging.
Okay.
That lets you collect, view, and analyze those log messages from your apps. You can troubleshoot issues, see where the bottlenecks are, and find ways to make things better.
Okay. What about the Neo environment?
Neo has its own tools. Dashboards for tracking performance, resource use, and errors.
Gotcha. So no matter what we're using, we have the tools to monitor our apps. Now, what's this ops automation I keep hearing about?
Ops automation is about taking those repetitive tasks, the ones you do over and over, and automating them.
Okay.
Freeing up your team to focus on bigger things.
What kind of tasks are we talking about?
Things like starting and stopping applications, scaling resources, backups and restores, deploying new versions, running those health checks we talked about earlier.
So much we can automate. What can we use to do all that?
SAP Automation Pilot.
Okay.
It has pre-built commands for common tasks, and you can create your own.
Okay, so no need to build robots from scratch.
Nope. And a lot of organizations use infrastructure as code tools like Terraform, too,
Okay.
to manage their BTP setup. It automates the provisioning and configuration of BTP resources.
So with Terraform, we're basically defining our entire BTP landscape as code. Okay, before we wrap up, I want to emphasize one last thing. Continuous improvement. Our BTP app is live, but it's not over. We need to keep making it better. What are some things to keep in mind?
Get feedback
Okay.
from users. Analyze how people are using the app and track those key metrics.
Yeah.
That way you can find areas to improve.
Got it. So listen to the audience, make changes based on their feedback. What else?
Stay updated on the new BTP releases and features. SAP is always adding new stuff. Don't miss out.
Right, got to keep up with the times.
Exactly. And keep looking for ways to automate and optimize those operations. Use those tools, Automation Pilot, Terraform, anything that can help you streamline and free up your team.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into SAP Business Technology Platform.
We cover a lot.
We did the account model, security, deployment, integration, operations, everything you need to know to manage BTP.
Hopefully you feel empowered to create your own BTP success story.
This is just the beginning. BTP is full of possibilities. Go explore, experiment, and see what you can do.
Have fun with it.